You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Welcome to this episode of the Business of Practice podcast, where we focus on the business and human sides of equine veterinary medicine. In this episode, we're going to talk to Jen Braid, CPA EA, about tips to recession-proof your practice. I'm your host, Kim Brown, editor of Equine Management. The Business of Practice podcast is brought to you in 2023 by CareCredit. Jennifer M. Braid is a certified CPA and an EA, meaning she has passed the Federal Enrolled Agents exam and is licensed to practice before the IRS. She's a principal in BFH CPAs Inc., which stands for Braid, Forthover, and Heinke. Since the firm's work is limited to serving veterinarians and their practices, Jen has developed a high level of expertise in the finance and tax areas of veterinary business. She is a trusted advisor to many practice owners, bookkeepers, and practice managers. Welcome to the podcast, Jen.
Thanks, Kim. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we want our audience to understand before we get started that this is a discussion and it doesn't construe tax advice. So if they have any questions about their own businesses, they need to discuss those with their personal tax advisor. But this may give them a few little bullet points to talk to their tax advisor about. And while most practices have finished their 2022 tax season, we're halfway through the second quarter of 2023. And the big R, or a recession, is still looming in our future, according to many financial analysts. So, Jen, can you give equine veterinarians and practices some tips on recession-proofing their practices?
Well, I think first we should talk about, recession-proofing isn't really possible, because if we could recession-proof, we'd be starting with the economy and not individual businesses. But what we need to focus on is what can we do to kind of brace so we can soften the impact of a recession and we can kind of get through it, hopefully unscathed. And kind of with that, the first point I want to make is that recession is temporary. Like all things, it's temporary. So we've just got to kind of get through it. And I think the best piece of advice I can give before even talking from, business and number standpoint is to be optimistic. Lead with optimism. Be the optimistic person on your team to keep the team knowing that this is temporary. We're going to get through this. And I think that's a really important point to start with.
Yeah.
Then in terms of thinking about where to go with the business, where to focus on, when it comes to the business, and the finances, there's really only two things you can do: make more money, spend less money. Those are your options. And so what are the best ways to do that? And the first thing is make more money, right? And we go, well, recession, we're not going to make more money. The fear is that there's going to be less. But think about creative ways to kind of adjust that. We all did it during the pandemic. We moved to alternative ways of managing our businesses because we were forced to. And so thinking creatively, how can I expand my service offerings? How can I change my service offerings? What options do I have? There's certainly always room for change to kind of work through that. The next thing is kind of just standard business is you should be reviewing your fee schedule and making sure you're keeping up with fee increases on a regular basis. Everything goes up, the cost of everything goes up, and it's easy when it's a one-for-one line item on an invoice. We pay so much for a drug, we charge the client for the drug. That's an easy thing to do. What we often fail to look at, or we forget to look at, is the soft costs, all the costs that aren't a line item on an invoice, taking those things into consideration. We've got a fantastic team of individuals. We want to pay them well. We don't want them vacating veterinary medicine to go somewhere else because they can make more money. And so we've got to make sure we've got enough money coming in. Those are things that you should be doing all the time, regardless of whether in a recession, if we're in a growth period, whatever it is. So I think those things in terms of the fees become really important as the first step, making more money. How do we make more money? It's not necessarily always, I need to do more work to make more money.
Right. And tell me, you mentioned personnel as a soft cost. What would be some other soft costs, Jen?
Well, I'm thinking more so in terms of soft costs. I'm thinking of the supplies. So, it's stuff like sutures, gauze, the soft costs of goods, the goods that we're using in veterinary medicine that don't become a direct line item to a client. Vaccine, that's the line item to a client. But there's a lot of materials we are using that, we're not taking into consideration. Did we increase the cost of surgeries when the suture cost went up? Did we do these things outside of just, the personnel and all of those pieces, just inventoriable items, goods that we're using in the course of services. So
Okay. I was thinking about it, how I know, every now and then I'll get a 5 or 10 or 20 or whatever dollar surcharge on my trash picking up, or, all of a sudden there's fee increases in just normal, your electric, your trash, your, cleaning service that you don't even think about. You just, okay, well, it's gone up 10%. So.
Yeah, I mean, everything's gone up 10% or more. I mean, that's where we're at. That's the reality of the last year or so. It seems like everything's gone up that much, but, personally, I don't advise the clients I work with to add surcharges and line items to invoices. When we had the outrageous fuel, sure, if you want to do a temporary fuel surcharge because that's what was being passed to you, fine. Of course, in the equine world, everybody's traveling, so you better be doing fuel charges. I mean, this shouldn't even be a conversation. But I don't like the idea of, nickel and diming line items on invoices. It's not something that I buy into. I know it's often out there and it's recommended. I personally don't recommend that. It's kind of build your services and set yourself apart. Why are you worth what you are worth? And, veterinarians are great at what they do, and there's a reason their clients keep going back to them. And those are the biggest things is kind of don't add line items to invoices, but consider it in terms of the overall structure there. Thinking about, in the equine world, so much is done on account. We have such high accounts receivable. And so we're doing stuff and we're spending money and we're paying drug vendors and we're just floating credit to all of our clients. And if we get slow pay, that's a lot of times what happens. Well, our vendors aren't going to let us slow pay, but then our clients are slow paying us. So, as things tighten up, things you could consider is incentives for upfront payment. Can I do some sort of small discount, or is there some sort of incentive that I can do if you pay up front at the time of service? Being able to collect immediately will go a long way to kind of keep the cash flowing as things tighten up. And that's always one way is thinking in terms of that, getting stiffer on who, what you're doing. If you've got clients who have historically been a slow pay, charging up front, 50% up front for me to even call out there. You've got to get in your truck, you got to hike out to wherever you're going, you've got gas costs, you've got all kinds of stuff, and time. I mean, time is the biggest factor there. And if you're not getting paid for that, when you've got bills to pay, consider, forcing down payments. That's an option.
Yeah, I'm real big. I think veterinarians should just have credit cards or something on file, and they should have an agreement that they get paid at time of service. I mean, I don't go to the grocery store and get groceries and not pay for them. So,
yeah. And, in the small animal world, we have a lot of that where there is no accounts receivable. So the equine world, because of the nature, oftentimes you're not on site with the owner or the responsible party. There's got to be some sort of a way to make that happen, whether, we've got upfront payments and things like that happening. I agree with you. You should be getting paid when the work is done. Why should you have to foot these bills and cover these costs, and they'll get around to paying you when they do?
Right. And what else do you think that people can do? We kind of talked about, the purchasing and making sure that that's covered in the overall. What about hiring? I mean, you did mention we want to pay our people well. And as things tighten up, how do you maintain that and keep your benefits?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to making sure you're evaluating all of your costs and getting rid of and eliminating unnecessary costs. Payroll is a necessary cost. And as we keep moving through and uh, expectations change. I was just reading an article about 401ks and how they're practically a necessity at this point. And you go back even 5, 10 years ago, and it was unheard of in small business. Stay away from 401ks. They're expensive. They cost too much money. All this stuff. And now it's like if you want to be competitive, you've got to be doing this. We know in the veterinary arena, we've got young veterinarians coming out with astronomical student loan debt, and there's an expectation there that, hey, you're going to help me get this paid, or I'm not going to be able to work, because if I can't cover these costs, whether right or not, it's the reality of it.
Right.
So, you can have whatever opinion about it. The reality is they've got astronomical student debt, and they're looking for it. Fortunately, there's been, movement on that front to allow employers to kind of contribute in that way, various things that have kind of put into play. But the only way you can really invest in personnel is by making more money or spending less money elsewhere. So I think, one of the best things you can do, and it's easy for us to get comfortable. The money's flowing, we kind of get loose and carefree and we're not watching stuff as tightly. But there is, I'd be willing to bet there's hardly anybody out there who can't find something to eliminate in their budget. I mean, you think of the world of subscription-based services we live in, and veterinary practices are not immune to that. They have subscription-based services up and down, their P&L, and I am certain there are things that they can either price shop and find cheaper, they can eliminate for a period of time. It doesn't mean eliminate it forever, but could be eliminated for a period of time. And I think that is something that should be being done all the time, but it's easy to go, everything's getting paid. My time is limited. I don't have time to negotiate all these contracts. But who do you got that can help you? What have you got in there that can truly be eliminated? Because there's got to be something. Whether
Right.
it's a subscription to a car wash for your truck, or some music streaming service or something that you're supplementing or paying, there's always a place to save money. So I think, one of the things that I think would be incredibly important and for practices to be doing with advisors, whether that's, their internal bookkeepers, if they've got the skill base, I think practices to some extent, you've been running your practice a long time, you know a lot about it. You can kind of work some of this math yourself. But I think finding a break-even calculation, what do I have to bring in every day, and am I hitting that mark to just keep everything afloat? Knowing that can give you a little bit of comfort. Starting there can let you know, how much cash reserves do I need to have to keep everything paid for some period of time. If I think, we're going to hit a recession, if the recession is going to be extensive, what does that look like? And so I think going through a break-even calculation, and that really kind of forces you to analyze every expenditure. Do I need this? Is this something I need? A lot of this is kind of the same stuff we were going through as the pandemic kind of hit and they started shutting down businesses. There was a lot of panic for business owners. I'm going, what are we going to do? How are we going to keep this all afloat? Like, who's going to do this? If everybody's out of work, nobody can pay for anything. And fortunately in the veterinary arena, everybody got pets and had extra animals, and there was a lot going on there. So veterinary medicine performed really well through the pandemic compared to some other industries that were decimated, like restaurant industries and things like that. So but at the beginning of the pandemic with that unknown, this is a lot of kind of the same thing as like bracing for this economic downturn. Where do we go? Other things that we can look at. So I think practice break even, find out how much money do I got to make, and then start tracking it. How often am I hitting that bar? And am I not hitting that bar? And if I'm not hitting that bar often enough, what do I need to do to adjust things? Raise fees or spend less? You got to find a way, right? Kind of the The next piece to be thinking about, staffing is the biggest part of it. And when we're budgeting for staffing, oftentimes we talk about, paying overtime hours to support staff, things like that. We don't want to pay overtime, but what's often overlooked is overpay, which would be, I scheduled you for 35, but I'm paying you 39 hours a week. That's 4 hours of pay that's not in my budget. What is the reason that that's happening? Why is that happening? And tracking that, and kind of, while the staff is our bread and butter. I mean, without staff, we can't do what we're doing. We still need to be really tight in that arena and go, while it may not be overtime hours, which are really easy to see on a payroll report, oh, look at these overtime hours I paid. It's the scheduled versus clocked piece that I think can be managed a little tighter. Stop clocking in 15 minutes early and clocking out 15 minutes late every day when that is not what I've budgeted for. If those are necessary hours, then we should be factoring those into the budget.
Yeah.
And kind of putting those pieces in. So
the Business of Practice podcast is brought to you by CareCredit. CareCredit keeps equine veterinarians at the heart of care by providing horse owners with simple, budget-friendly financing options. By bridging the gap between cost and care, CareCredit supports healthy financial relationships between veterinarians and their clients. It can help them move forward with care a horse needs whenever and wherever it's needed. And, what about investing in your practice during a pandemic? Hiring or building or renovating or getting that new piece of equipment. That can be pretty scary for somebody when they think, oh my gosh, they're saying within 12 months, there's a probability that we'll have a recession. I mean, what do you advise about investing in your practice?
Well, it's no different during a recession than not during a recession. You don't invest unless it's going to make you money. I mean, we don't just spend money unless it's a need. I mean, yeah, we all want the shiny piece of new equipment, but the reality is that going to pay for itself? Do I have the ability to push that through? Thinking about acquisitions of equipment specifically, or big expenditures like that, interest rates are awful right now, for lack of a better term. I mean, they're not great. They're not where they were a year ago or 2 years ago. So thinking about kind of what do you have available to you? Can you afford it? Is it worth it? Can you push it off? Can you push it off a few months, or do you need it? Did the equipment break and you need to replace it? Or do I just want it because I've got a good offer on the table? I went to AAEP and it was smiling at me. What is it that's forcing me or kind of making me think I want this piece of equipment? It comes down to that. I really think, during times of recession, we got to tighten the belt a little bit. We've got to just kind of like limp through, get through it. Again, it's temporary. So it's not like you're never going to get that piece of equipment. But if you don't need it, I wouldn't be doing that. I really think the focus should be on making sure we've got lines of credit available to us. What do we have? Do we have an open line of credit with our bank? In the event that we had to, everybody should have one. They should be considered kind of emergency funding. I never, ever want to have to use it. I just want to know it's there in the event that I do. Work on, strengthening cash reserves everywhere that you can. And, I think one of the easiest ways to look at, how much cash should I have on hand is thinking a certain number of payrolls. Can I pay 3 months of payroll? If I can pay 3 months of payroll, then worst case scenario, I've got 3 months to wind down everything, right? If I had to, that's doom and gloom kind of thinking, but it's that reality of, can I get 3 to 6 months of payroll? And as we brace for recession, can I get even more than that? Can I get a year's worth of payroll? That gives me a longer time. I mean, it's taken a bit of time for us to kind of get where we are economically, and it's going to take a bit of time to kind of recover from that too. So, if you can get a year's worth of payroll, that's a lot to cover. I mean, it's 40 to 50% of every practice's budget, annual budget, covering payroll costs. But those are things for consideration. Making sure you've got the open credit lines, I think, is really important. And a lot of times I get like, I want to pay down my debt. I want to pay down my debt. I don't think that, as you're bracing for recession, that's always the best route. It could be, but you've got to look at your individual situation. I wouldn't be tying up funds in investments that you can't access easily. You want to have access. You want to be as liquid as possible during a recession. Don't tie it up in things. If you're thinking about construction, I would recommend you try to hold off unless you absolutely have to. Just the interest rates on those loans are massive right now. Where interest rates are, I've seen clients who locked into variable rate loans when rates were 5% and now they're at 10% on their loans, massive differences. So avoid variable rate loans, even when rates are low, because you never know when the economy is going to send us in the other direction.
Yeah. And the big T word that everybody's always afraid of, taxes. And I'm sorry, you've climbed up the stairs a few. If you can go before the IRS and argue with them, I mean, bless your heart, I want you on my team. Taxes. What can we do to help ourselves as veterinarians with our taxes to get ready for a recession?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you can't make the taxes go away. And if you've got someone telling you that you can, run. That's the best advice I can give you. Run. One of the things that is so heavy in the small business arena is just the ERC, the employee retention credit. You're hearing about it everywhere. It's massive tax refunds, massive stuff. And there are like fly-by-night firms out there trying to push people to do it. And the IRS is fighting against it. The AICPA is fighting against it. It's looking really bad. They're getting ready to start auditing these ERC claims. And unless you truly had a decline in revenues and it was 50% decline in revenues for the first round of ERC, you don't qualify for it. So if you've got firms that are kind of pushing forward on that, I would have you look at that again as a business owner. In terms of taxes, as everything costs more, you're going to make less money. The taxes are going to go down. But what can you do for yourself? Depending on how your business is situated, whether you're a sole proprietor, you're a single owner of an S corporation or a partnership, it kind of varies a little bit. But certainly looking at how can you defer income into retirement? What can you do there? What are your options? Do you have a 401k plan? If you're kind of a solo practitioner, which is big in the equine world, can you set yourself up a SEP? If you've got some extra cash, can you set yourself up a SEP plan? They're easy to set up and you can put big money into SEP plans. We're talking like 50,000 plus can go in there and be deferred from a tax standpoint, if you've got the cash on hand to do it. Those are certainly options there. You want to make sure you're working with a qualified tax advisor who can make sure you're hitting every deduction that's available to you. It's so hard as a tax preparer. There's just no one size fits all. It's not a here you go, guys. This is how you're going to save all the money on taxes. But making sure that we are documenting every expense. One of the things I like to remind people is just because you spent it doesn't mean that the IRS is going to say, yeah, it's good. Documentation is so important. A credit card statement that shows you spent money here at this store or that store or wherever it was is not substantiation for the IRS. You need the underlying documentation that shows exactly what was purchased, what was there. Thinking about mileage, vehicle mileage. I mean, equine, we're on the road. That's what you guys are doing. You're out there, you're on the road, you're using your truck. But if you don't have contemporaneous documentation, whether you're doing that through an app, I know there's lots of them out there. I don't even know all the ones that are there, but making sure you're keeping that documentation so that you're getting every ounce of deduction available to you there. I think those are really important things to remember all the time, is that we've got to have the proper documentation to make sure we're doing that. You should be meeting with your tax tax advisors, as soon as you get a little breathing room, now is not necessarily the time in the equine world. You guys are busier than ever, but certainly before the end of the year, you want to be, as you get to the second half of, the third quarter, gearing up with your tax advisors and go, what should I be doing? What should I be thinking about? Because each individual situation is so different. And, you should be asking those questions well in advance to give you enough time to determine where to go.
Well, and that's one reason that, I wanted to talk to you so early in the year. And I do appreciate, I realize you're probably still zombie-fied by doing everything that went through to extensions and trying to get all those done.
I call it my tax hangover.
Oh my goodness, I know it's like veterinarians during foaling season. They just get to be zombies by the time it's May and June. So,
yep.
But yeah, asking your tax advisor questions as early in the year as possible, because sometimes by the end of the year, you don't have time to implement some of these things.
Absolutely. And, we in the tax world, we always talk about, we'll worry about this year's taxes this year. We'll worry about next year's taxes next year. I don't think that's quite the strategy we need. We need to be thinking a little longer term. If I do this year, how does that impact next year? Sometimes we want to kind of move things around. What tax bracket are you in? Where is it going to hit you? Maybe I want to spread those costs over 2 years, or maybe I want to do some things a little different. I'm talking about accelerate your receivables, get people to pay you up front. But when you get that cash, most equine practices are running on a cash basis. So they're not paying taxes until they get paid, which means if you're getting paid, you're paying taxes, right? So kind of strategizing that realistically, where should you be to make sure you can cash flow and do the tax? So to me, if you've got an integrated advisor who can kind of pull those two pieces together, this is how it impacts you from a tax perspective, but this is how it impacts you from a business perspective, because they interplay so much. And if you don't have someone looking at both those pieces, one piece of advice may contradict the other. It's one of the things in terms of my career and what I do with my clients, where I always talk about, as your tax preparer, this is what I say, but as your business advisor, this is what I say, and they don't necessarily agree with each other. As a business, we want to make as much money as possible. And from a tax perspective, we don't want to make any money because we don't want to pay any taxes. So they're very contradictory. So I think having someone who can kind of integrate those two pieces, or at least have a couple advisors who can work together to kind of give you some of what you need, is the way to go to make sure you're looking at it from all perspectives.
That's great. And Jen, is there anything else that you think is just top of mind tip? And again, we remind our audience that these are just tips from a discussion. This is not tax advice. This is to give you some ideas of things that you need to talk to your own tax advisor about. But Jen, is there anything else that you can think of that maybe you'd like to offer?
Yeah, there was, one other thing that we kind of glossed over a little bit is thinking about, who are your vendors? Is there a place where I can buy lesser costs goods? What generic stuff is out there? What do I have? What's real big right now is exclusivity contracts. Only do business with me, trying to avoid some of that to see where can you spread and get the best pricing on your vendors. So kind of looking at diversification of your vendor base, who am I using, and making sure we've kind of got some price options there that we can pivot. Also, thinking about recession, if those vendors have to scale back, it's not anything new to us. We've had lots of drugs and supply shortages and issues, from time to time. So the more options we've got potentially to kind of keep things going, I think that's something else for consideration as well. And, kind of my final thing is going to go back to the first thing I said, which is this is temporary. And for your business to be as successful as it can be, you have to have that optimistic belief that your business will survive and overcome. And if you can lead with optimism, your team can also kind of calm during, these rough patches as we go forward.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for joining us today. And a big thanks to our audience for listening to the Business of Practice and to our sponsor, CareCredit, who allows us to have these discussions. And we invite you to visit equimanagement.com or your favorite podcast network to hear all the episodes of the Business of Practice. And if you have any questions or suggestions for the podcast, send an email to me at kbrown, that's the letter K Brown, at equinenetwork.com.